This is the introductory video for the Physics 1101-1120 lab exam. The purpose of this video is to explain to you what to expect in your lab exam. So first of all, the lab exam is just a regular experiment. So there's a write-up for it in your lab manual, just like normal, and you can prepare for it ahead of time, just like usual. I'm going to be telling you later in the video what experiment it is that you'll be doing for your lab exam. Now first of all, because the lab exam is just a regular experiment, a lot of what you do for it should be very familiar to you based on what you've been doing in the lab so far. So there'll be an experimental apparatus, you take your data, you write it up in your lab notebook just like normal, you'll be creating a spreadsheet and a typed report, and there's also a graph for this experiment. So just like usual, you're going to be handing in a lab notebook, a spreadsheet, a typed report, and a graph. Now there are some differences in the lab exam relative to what you're used to as well, so let me go over those now. First of all, the lab exam is worth twice what a normal lab is, and you only have the 3-hour lab period to finish it. So you don't have any extra time to hand it in, you must complete it in 3 hours. You're also going to be working alone, so you will not have a partner and you're not allowed to talk to other students during the lab exam. You can ask your lab instructor questions for clarification only. So what that means is that if you're not sure what the lab manual is asking you to do, you can ask your lab instructor to clarify that for you. Likewise, if it seems like your equipment's not behaving correctly, you can ask your lab instructor to help you with that. However, if you're not sure what you're supposed to be doing with your data, those unfortunately are the sorts of questions that your lab instructor cannot answer for you. However, if you're not sure, go ahead and ask, because the worst that's going to happen is your lab instructor will tell you that they can't answer that question. So go ahead and ask. Now, one thing that's quite different for the lab exam than from a regular experiment is that you're not allowed to bring computer files with you. So you cannot, for example, make your spreadsheet ahead of time and bring it with you. You have to create it in the lab period itself. Same thing with the typed report. It must be created in the 3-hour lab period. You will, however, have access to that template example spreadsheet that you're used to having in the lab period. So you can't create it ahead of time, but you will have the template spreadsheet. You just have to create your spreadsheet in the 3-hour lab period. You're going to be making a graph during the lab exam, and it can be done in the Linegraph program. So you do not need to make a hand-drawn graph. It can be just a computer graph. At this point in the semester, you haven't necessarily taken as much graphing as you maybe would have liked to, so I do recommend that you read through the graphing section in your lab manual just to refresh your memory about what sorts of things should be on your graph. You are allowed to write anything that you want to by hand in your lab notebook ahead of time. So for example, if you wanted to work out your uncertainty expressions ahead of time, you're allowed to do that in the notebook. You could also, for example, write out your theory section with the intention of then copying it into your typed report later. As long as it's written by hand in the lab notebook, that's allowed, but don't bring any computer files and don't bring any computer printouts. And so, without further ado, the experiment that you're going to be doing for your lab exam will be the simple pendulum experiment. So there's a write-up in the lab manual for the pendulum experiment. I recommend you read that early. There's also an introductory video online that you can watch to prepare for the experiment ahead of time. And again, I recommend that you watch that ahead of time and maybe do it a little bit early so that if you have any questions, you can get in touch with your lab instructor and get those clarified. So if you have any questions about the lab exam, get in touch with your lab instructor and good luck!